For many years, London's dead were buried in what you can imagine, the local cemeteries. Completely normal to bury your dead in your local parish. What's more normal than that? But they were getting a little bit crowded. Actually, when I say a little bit, a lot. By the time they got to the 1850s, the death rate was rising rapidly. With illnesses such as tuberculosis, cholera, smallpox, they kept on filling up. Cemeteries were literally bursting. It was said they'd buried 11,000 people per acre. Now, to give you a rough guide, these days that's 1,000 per acre. So there was a lot of people in a small space. Bodies were being buried on bodies. So when they were digging graves, they were finding bodies. So they were kind of just burying people on top of other people. Open graves were a big thing, and I mean a big thing. They would layer upon layer of dead bodies in coffins, but the smell was awful and the fumes were terrible. Local residents would have kept their windows closed all the time. And the water supply, tainted by the dead bodies too. Quite frankly, it was all a bit of a mess. So in 1832, Parliament pushed through a bill to encourage outside cemeteries, privately owned, outside of central London. They were all open between 1833 and 1841. And they were Kendall Green, West Norwood, Highgate West and East, Apni Park, Brompton, Nunhead and Tower Hamlets. Now, some of these cemeteries have little stories, little quirks. The oldest of the 7 in northwest London is Kendall Green, and it's still in use today. One of the most famous graves is Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Now, if you watch our other channel, you'll know we know a little bit about him. In one of my previous videos, I talked about Henry Taylor, who got squashed by the coffin. He was one of the pallbearers. He's buried here too. And the crematorium here. A lot of famous people have been cremated. To name a few, Freddie Mercury, Alan Rickman and Gary Rhodes. Build number 2 was West Norwood. This is the first Gothic style cemetery, and it was built on a hill, apparently a little bit closer to heaven. Now this one only does cremations now, and if you've already got a family plot. So if you've already got a family plot, you're in. It even apparently had its own necropolis railway to transport bodies from one place to another. Now, Highgate West and East, this one's still in use. Now, one of the graves is a radioactive grave, Alexander Litvinenko. He's buried here, 12 feet down, in lead-lined coffin. Now, Victorians were obsessed with ancient Egypt, and they wanted to be buried like that too. So, the catacombs were built, and Egyptian Avenue. They wanted to be buried above ground, still in coffins, but above the ground. Now, this was fine, except for then the bodies would decay and ferment, and it wasn't very nice. They were obsessed with the fact that the fumes coming from the bodies were making everybody ill. To combat that, they started using lead-lined coffins. But the gases that were then produced from the bodies kind of stayed in the coffin and kept expanding to the point where potential explosion. So to combat this, a new coffin was manufactured. It had a hole in it, a little pipe, which they lit to the end, so all the gases burnt away. It could take up to 3 weeks to burn all the gases away. Then there's the postmodern artistic masterpieces. This one is artist Patrick Caulfield. His tombstone states, he's dead. Now, Apni Park. This was the first of 3 that were built in 1840. It was a non-conformist cemetery, which basically meant for those people who didn't conform to the Church of England. Now, in a previous video, I mentioned Frank Bostock in my lion taming one. He was buried here. Also, Amy Winehouse filmed in this cemetery her Back to Black video. And apparently it was also home to a 170-year-old holly bush. I think I might have to look that one myself. Brompton is the second one, built in 1840. Now, apparently they have their own apiary. They actually have their own bees, which means they're kind of making cemetery honey. They sell it to raise money for the cemetery. Now, John Peake Knight, the inventor of the traffic lights, is buried here. He was also a railway manager who also designed the railway signalling system. Now, number 3 for 1840. It was a busy year that year. Nunhead. Now, this is a complicated one, bear with. It was sold for £1 in 1975. Southwark Council bought it from United Cemetery Company, which couldn't run it profitably, so they left it to its own devices, who bought it from the London Cemetery Company in 1960, who went bankrupt. Only in the 1990s did it see a new lease of life when the Friends of Nunhead Cemetery took the task to renovate and restore it. The chapel in the centre also looks ruined due to disrepair, but actually it was an arson attack in 1976. Now the last one, Tower Hamlets, which was built in 1841. Now once again, a previous video, this time the SS Princess Alice. At least 29 of the bodies from that ship are buried here. That's also alongside a lot of sailors. Because it's right by the Docklands, it's much easier to use this cemetery for that. Now there's also a grave with 3 policemen. That's odd in itself. One fell through a skylight while chasing a suspect, one drowned on holiday, and the other one, while breaking up a fight, got stabbed in the neck. They weren't related, they didn't die at the same time. They did, however, all belong to the same station, Leman Street Station. Now the only real explanation, because they weren't related and because they died at different times, is that the station themselves probably arranged the burials. The Magnificent Seven, although not quite so magnificent anymore, are still stunning. And a fabulous collection of cemeteries for the people of London. Stunning locations, if you can call cemeteries stunning, full of wildlife and flowers and lots of memories.